Welcome to the Sports Spectrum Podcast, where faith and sports collide. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Welcome to episode 51 of the Sports Spectrum Podcast. My name is Jason Romano. It is great to have you here joining us on the program today. As always, you can subscribe and download the podcast on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, everywhere podcasts are found. All of our content, of course, at sportsspectrum.com. And my suggestion, take your device, your iPhone, your Android, your tablet, your iPad, whatever it is, and click that subscribe button. Go to the podcast app and click the subscribe button. And that just assures you that you're never going to miss an episode of this podcast. And we've had a lot of them now, 51 of them. And we do appreciate you listening. But I think the greatest thing is that you can subscribe and that thing just pops back up into your phone or your tablet every time a new episode is released. I know for the podcast that I subscribe to, that makes it just a ton easier for me to know when there's a new episode dropping, because if I subscribe to the podcast, it just alerts me on my phone. So really easy way to do that, something to consider for you guys as well. On today's episode, we're really excited about this one. This is James McCann. He's our guest today, and he's the Detroit Tigers catcher. So he's in his third year. He's only been in the majors for a few years. He made his first major league start in September of 2014, catching Justin Verlander against the Kansas City Royals, the great Justin Verlander, who's pitching for the Houston Astros in the World Series. And, you know, he was a good player for a team that's in rebuilding mode right now, the Detroit Tigers. They didn't have the season that their fans would like them to have, and they sort of went into this rebuilding mode by trading a lot of veterans, including Verlander. And James is a part of that rebuilding process. He had a great second half, and he's a man of God, a man of faith, recently married, expecting twin boys early in 2018. So his life is about to change on many levels. And in this episode of the podcast, we talk a lot about just balancing being a Major League Baseball player with being a man of faith, being a husband, soon to be a dad, what that looks like to be a Christian in baseball. You know, there's this sort of stereotype that they're soft and that's anything further from the truth, as you'll hear James say. And really, I want you to pay special attention to the very last question that I ask him. It's about 30 minutes in, and he tells the story of how he should not be here as a human being. He shouldn't be alive. And it's a powerful story, and I really want you to hear that part as well. So without further ado, let's get right to our conversation. Here is Detroit Tigers catcher, James McCann. James, how are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. Thanks for joining us here on the podcast. And, you know, we're taping this Monday morning. It's October 30th. So we're almost finished with the season. The World Series has maybe one or two games left. Houston Astros, Los Angeles Dodgers. And I'd be remiss if I didn't just ask you as a baseball player about Game 5, which basically didn't end until well into the wee hours of the morning. I think it was after 1 a.m. on the East Coast, which is where I am here in Connecticut. And it was pretty much one of the greatest games I've ever seen. I've never seen a game like this where teams that were down kept coming back on both sides, down multiple runs, and finally a walk-off hit for the Astros wins Game 5 in 10 innings. What were your thoughts on that game and just what you saw or heard and just the kind of craziness that was happening?
Well, you know, for me, it actually goes back to Game 1. This whole series has kind of been it's been like two heavyweights landing punch after punch on each other, and no one can really get away. No one can get that knockout punch in, and it just kind of escalated into what was Game 5. I never saw it coming with Dallas Keuchel and Clayton Kershaw on the mound.
Exactly.
Two Cy Young Award winners. You know, you would have thought that possibly Game 4 and Game 5 would have been switched with just who was starting. You'd have thought that Game 5 would have been a pitcher's duel that flew by.
Yeah.
And then when Keuchel gave up those runs early, as a fan, but also as a player, knowing what it's like to face Kershaw, I thought, man, that could be it. And next thing you know, it's the fifth inning and it's 7-7, and both those guys are long gone. It's honestly, for me, it's something that's great for the game of baseball. And I hope that fans everywhere are realizing how special this World Series has been.
Well, it also shows me that as a person like myself in the media and ministry, kind of both, but really media as well. And I worked at ESPN for many years and just thinking like, we know nothing because we go into this game and in game one, what was it? 2 hours and 20 minutes, maybe the shortest game in 30 years, quick, well pitched, pitcher's duel, the kind of game you would expect between those guys. And then last night is 13-12 and the ball was just flying all over the place. Have you ever seen anything like that? From a perspective of a player, a game like that, maybe a game that you played in where you go in and you think this is going to be 2-1 and it ends up being the complete opposite.
Yeah, I think that's something that's so special about the game. If you look at all professional sports, something that's so special about baseball is it's not always what the paper says. It's not always just because one team on paper is better doesn't mean that they're going to come out. Now you look at basketball, you look at football. A lot of times the team that's better on paper has a huge advantage, but in baseball it's so different. And then so that kind of goes right into line with what you would expect from a game. You never know what's going to happen. You never know what that Cy Young Award winner may not have his best stuff that day, and that offense may have their best stuff. The next thing you know, it's that 13-12 ball game. But that's the beauty of the game. That I don't know that every fan or in the sports world, I'm sure baseball fans specifically see it, but in the sports world, I think that gets lost on sports fans is how special that part of the game is.
You ever played in a game anywhere close to a game like that where teams were down multiple runs on both sides and kept coming back, and then finally, there was a walk-off at the end? Is there any game in your career that maybe even in the minors or high school or college or whatever that you played in that was anything like that?
I don't think I can ever remember playing in a game like that. Much less seeing a game like that. I think that game will go down in history as one of the best of all time, World Series or not.
Wow, that's crazy. That tells me so much about how rare that Game 5 was, when you can't even, in your career and playing baseball for many years, can't even think of a game that was close to that, even if the stakes weren't as the same. That's awesome. Well, we're talking to James McCann here. He is the Detroit Tigers catcher. And I want to talk about your season for a minute, James. You just finished up your third full year in the big leagues. And I was doing a little research, looking at, social media on your Instagram page, and you regrammed a post that your wife, Jessica, shared that this season may not have gone the way you hoped, but that she was, quote, thankful for the struggles. And I really like the way she said thankful for the struggles, because I think that's where we learn, especially as believers in Christ, and where we can persevere. But for you, describe what that 2017 season was like on and off the field for you.
Well, that quote from my wife is dead on. From an individual standpoint and also from a team standpoint. Looking as an outsider looking in, as a team in Detroit this year, we sold at the deadline. We made more trades at the non-waiver deadline at the end of August when we traded Justin Upton and Justin Verlander, and we entered into a full rebuild mode, and we've lost nearly 100 games. So definitely there's some struggles in that, in the sense that anyone that is a competitor shows up to win, whether they're playing a game on the biggest stage in professional sports, or you're playing a game of checkers in the locker room before the game. You're going to do everything you can to win.
Of course.
So when you're losing the way that we lost towards the end of the year, it can be very frustrating, and it definitely challenges you, and you have to find a way to take positives out of it, because if you allow the negativity and you allow the frustration to take over, it's going to change who you are as a person. And that was a challenge at times, was to find the positives that were there, but everything happens for a reason. I can't tell you right now why the Tigers lost the way that we did this year. I can't tell you why we had to enter into this rebuild mode. I don't know what the purpose of it all is, but I know that one day I'll be able to sit back and say, well, here's what came of those struggles. And that's from a team aspect, from an individual aspect. I broke into the league in 2015, or I guess 2014, and I made my first opening day roster in 2015. And in 2015, I kind of started the year as a platoon, starting against lefties, and then through injuries and other issues, by the end of the year, I was starting. I was a starting catcher. Came into 2016 as a starting catcher, and I think it was like the third or the fourth game. I had a real bad collision at first base where I rolled my ankle on the bag as I was colliding with the first baseman, and I was out for about almost a month with a real bad sprained ankle. And it kind of affected me the whole year. It was kind of a up and down year, and there's a lot of struggles with it. And I remember finishing the year thinking, I'm a lot better because of these struggles. Now I know how to handle this, type of struggle moving forward, because I had, my rookie year in 2015 in the big leagues. Not that I didn't struggle at any time, but I had a decent year, and there wasn't an extended period of struggling. There was not an extended season of, man, when am I going to get out of this? So 2016 was kind of that time for me where I learned how to deal with that. So coming in 2017, I was prepared for anything, if you want to say that. Well, the first month of the season, I mean, I literally, the only time I got a hit was if I hit a home run. You talk about a struggle. It was, I hit a ball hard, it would go right at somebody. And then it just kind of spiraled, and I ended up, I think for the first half of the season, I hit right around 200. And for a good portion of that first half, I was under 200. And I had numerous teammates telling me, they look up at the scoreboard, see my average, and they can't believe that I'm hitting what I'm hitting, and it doesn't seem like I'm hitting like that. Well, I can tell you, it seemed like I was hitting that. Leaving the ballpark going 0 for 4, day after day. Going home wondering, when am I going to break out of this? What am I going through? I remember telling my wife at different points, I thought God taught me the lesson he wanted to teach me last year. Why is he putting me through this again? And I kept thinking all these questions, but I finally came to the realization that all these questions were, why me, why me, why me? And then when I flipped it in my mind, why me? Why is God blessing me with the opportunity to struggle at this level? And I started to think, how many people would trade with me in a heartbeat to say, well, I got to play in the big leagues. I'll take 0 for 4, but I got to play in the big leagues. And that's when I kind of started to start finding positives and adjusting. And I made a few adjustments at the plate. And I remember my wife and I, during the season, we read a book of one chapter from the book of Psalms every night. And
it's great.
I forget we started that. I don't know. I forget when we started that, but it was towards right around the All-Star break. And I remember going into. I wish I could remember what psalm it was. It was somewhere early in the Psalms, like 7, 8, 12, 13, something like that. The night before the second half started, we went with 2. We missed the night before, so we read 2 chapters. And just kind of happened. This is, a godsend, obviously. But the first chapter we read was David talking about, I've cried out to you, Lord. When are you going to hear my prayers? I'm tired. Basically, I'm tired. I can't do this anymore on my own. I've prayed and I've prayed. It's time for you to move. And the very next chapter is David saying, "Praise you, O Lord. You have answered my prayers. You've done what I've asked. My enemy has been destroyed." And so I think we kind of looked at each other at that moment and we said, the second half is going to be different. That was God's way. For whatever reason, we had to do those 2 chapters together. And the way we felt the first half of the season was, when are you going to answer our prayers, Lord? We've been through the struggle. We need your help. And then all of a sudden, that next chapter, Lord, you've answered our prayers. And sure enough, the second half was a completely different outcome for me individually. I ended up hitting 253 or whatever it was on the season, and ended up having a very respectable year.
Wow, that's a really great story. And I think that shows because you play in a sport that is so not only demanding, but you're truly judged on your performance. It's where you're, and as followers of Christ, we're taught it's not what we can do, but what Jesus did for us, right? So for you, in the midst of the highs and lows, what has that really taught you through your faith in Christ and staying grounded in Him? Because baseball, man, it's every day. You could go 3 for 4 one day, 0 for 4 the next, and it's just up and down. It can really be a roller coaster. So the Psalms and doing that with your wife is an awesome way. But how else do you stay grounded in that and just stay balanced in knowing that even though you're playing a sport that is about performance, your faith in Christ has nothing to do with performance?
Well, I think it's so difficult. Human nature is to get caught up in the ups and the downs. Human nature is to ride that roller coaster and to ride the highs and ride those lows, and you feel sorry for yourself when you're down. But the best thing that I've learned over all the years is baseball is what I do. It's not who I am. And finding that identity of who you are is the key. And that identity is that I'm a child of God. I'm a follower of Jesus, and because of my identity in Jesus, I'm different. I don't need to ride the highs. I don't need to ride the lows. I can be the same day in and day out because of where I place my identity, and that's in Jesus.
Is there someone in baseball, maybe when you first came up or even in the minors, maybe a teammate or a mentor, somebody that was an integral part in keeping you grounded in the Lord in the clubhouse, somebody with the teams that you've played on?
There's been numerous people over the course of my career that I've come across that have had an impact on me, and I've actually been very blessed over the course of my career, college all the way through the big leagues, of having other believers that I can surround myself with and be accountability partners with, and just kind of go through life together.
How important is that to have that?
It's very, very important. Especially as a man, the tendency is to want to do everything on your own. As a man, you think that you can handle things on your own, and you're big macho, and you can do it all on your own. But the truth is that's exactly what the enemy wants. That's exactly what Satan wants, is for us to try and go through life on our own, because we can't do it on our own. We can't fight off temptation without having those accountability partners, without having those people in your life that can kind of knock you back to reality when you need it.
We're talking to James McCann, the Detroit Tigers catcher, here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. And you are the Detroit Tigers catcher, James. So we'll pivot back to baseball for a moment. I want to just ask you a question about the ace for many years. And you mentioned him earlier, Justin Verlander, and catching him. And he was obviously traded to Houston at the waiver deadline, as you mentioned, August 31st. And obviously a wonderful move for him and the Astros in the sense that they're, in the World Series on the verge of potentially winning a championship. You've caught him numerous times over the past few years. Just tell us what makes this guy so special. I mean, he threw what he did in the ALCS against the Yankees and throwing 140 pitches or something like that. I think it was game 2. Was unlike many, many things I've ever seen in baseball, especially in today's age where you baby the pitcher so much and you're taking them out after 80, 90 pitches. He's truly a workhorse. What makes that guy special?
I think you're exactly right. He is a workhorse. He's old school Nolan Ryan. I'm going to pitch until my arm's going to fall off. He's that competitor that whether he's at 20 pitchers or 120 pitches, he's going to find a way to get you out. And the best way to put it, and this sounds crazy, is he's a specimen. He's he's just different. There's certain people in this world, and it's definitely seen in the game of baseball, that it's almost as if when they were born, God reached down and said, "You're going to be able to throw 100 miles an hour on pitch 119 in Game 7 of the World Series." Or you're going to be able to hit a ball 600 feet. And it's not that he doesn't work hard, because he does work hard, and he does things the right way and takes care of his body. But ultimately, he's just different. He does things that normal average human beings can't do, and that's what makes him Justin Verlander. That's what makes him a first ballot Hall of Famer when the time comes.
In August, you were part of this little scuffle that happened. We'll call it, I don't even like that word, but it's when the Yankees pitcher, Dellin Betances, threw a pitch, it hit you in the head. Emotions run high. I don't want to talk about that specific moment, but I really want to talk about keeping your emotions in check as a Christian and playing the game of baseball. It's such a high-profile job, such a competitive job. You're trying to literally earn your keep every single day. Describe what that's like, just the emotional highs and lows of baseball and trying to keep that in check.
Yeah, well, there's two things I really have to say about that. First is that's something that every believer and every follower of Jesus in the game is going to have some sort of struggle with. That's part of something that you have to keep yourself in check, because you look around and you open your ears and there's curse words being thrown here and negative things being thrown out here, and it's very easy to fall into that same, whatever you want to call it, to fall into that trend and use that kind of language and say the things and respond the way that everyone else is responding in a heated moment. So that is something that you have to, like I said earlier, you have to have those accountability partners. You have to have that support system that you can lock shields with and go through life together, because one of you may be in a heated argument and the other one can kind of pull you aside and say, hey, you need to cool off. But the other thing in regards to that is it's a lot of times as Christians, especially people that maybe don't know Christianity, they look at you as a Christian and say, "Oh, you're supposed to be meek. You're supposed to be humble. You're supposed to be soft."
Yep.
But that couldn't be even any further from the truth. When you go read through the Bible, numerous times, go to the book of Joshua and look how many times God said, be strong, be courageous. Go be a competitor for me. Go do what you have to do to fight for me. So I think when you place God at you set your eyes on the heavens, you set your eyes on Jesus, you're going to perform the way that you need to. And if that means in this situation you got to slide hard into second base and take somebody out to win a ball game, well, that's what has to happen. Now, do you do that with malicious intent? Absolutely not. But I do believe that there's a difference, and we're not called to be meek and soft. We're called to be ferocious in our faith. And the way that we handle those heated moments, if we're able to, your emotions are going to run high. There's times, where Jesus, got angry when he went to the temple and threw over all the tables. But it's how you handle that emotion of anger, and do you let it control you, or do you control it?
Now, family, huge in your life. Obviously, you're married. You mentioned your wife, Jessica. We mentioned your wife, Jessica, earlier. You're 3 years now into marriage. You're expecting twins. And I'm sure you're doing a lot of praying now with that life change about to happen. But I'm just curious, in marriage, being a young professional athlete, what the Lord has been teaching you about marriage. What have you learned during this time as a husband in 3 years about marriage?
Well, the being a professional athlete, especially in baseball, it's very easy to go home and let your how your day at the field affect who you are away from the field. And something that I've learned in marriage is that, when you're dealing with your marriage, you're dealing with your wife, and you're dealing with things at home, you have a different hat that you wear at home than you do at the field. You're wearing that husband hat, or you're wearing that daddy hat, or whatever it may be at home. You're not wearing that Detroit Tigers hat that you had on the field. So no matter how good or how bad things went at the field that day, you're a different person at home. I shouldn't say different person. You have a different job title at home. I'm very, very blessed with the woman I married. She loves baseball. She lives and breathes the same things that I do. So she's frustrated when I'm frustrated. She's ecstatic when I'm ecstatic, and we can go through that life together. But at the same time, she needs me to be more than just a baseball player. And I think that's what I've learned the most in 3 years and it applies to anyone, no matter what your job is, whether no matter what you're doing during the day. When you come home at night, your wife needs you to be that rock. Your wife needs you to be that person that can lead the faith of the family and take care of those things at home that she needs you to take care of.
And your family's about to double pretty soon here with the expectation that twins are coming. How are you preparing for that world and the new title you're going to be having as a dad?
Yeah, I guess we decided to skip the zone defense and went right to man-to-man.
That's right.
I don't know what to expect. Everyone that we've talked to that has twins has said, well, you're doing it right. You're doing it first, so you won't know any difference.
Yep.
Changing 2 diapers, feeding 2 babies, doing it, you won't know any different. But no, when we announced our pregnancy, we prayed for 1 and God blessed us with 2. We're very, very excited. They're going to be identical boys. So I think one of the things that I'm so excited about as going to be a father is not just teaching these boys how to become men, but teaching them how to be men of God.
That's really cool. I'm excited for you, my friend. We're talking to James McCann, Detroit Tigers catcher, here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Let's finish it up with a little rapid fire, a little baseball rapid fire. James, you ready?
All right.
All right, here we go. Favorite childhood sports memory?
Favorite childhood sports memory? It would have to be when the Angels won the World Series in 2002. Growing up in Southern California, I went to a bunch of Dodgers games when I was a kid, and for whatever reason, I started to fall in love with the Angels, and I became an Angels fan. And watching them win that World Series in 2002, Ben Nerstad catching that final out, that was pretty neat.
Who was your guy? For me, when I was a kid, Darryl Strawberry was my guy. Big Mets fan growing up. Everyone has a guy.
Okay.
Who was your guy? Who was your sports guy?
My guy was actually Vladimir Guerrero.
Okay.
And it was, when he came to the Angels, that was just icing on the cake, because I think I was either 7 or 8, and I went to a Diamondbacks game, and they were playing the Expos, and that was when Vladdy was at the Expos, and I was there for batting practice, and for whatever reason, he was out in right field, and he went to flip the ball into the stands, and among 15 people, he had everyone. He motioned for everyone to move aside, and I had my own little lane. He flipped me the ball, and I caught it. And when he turned around, I saw Guerrero, and from then on, he's my favorite player.
Now come on, now that's an amazing childhood sports moment, catching a ball from Vlad Guerrero. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Very
that
cool.
was pretty sweet.
Absolutely. All right, so let's go a little bit off of baseball for a minute. Your favorite movie of all time? There's a movie that you pop in and you're watching it. It comes up on TV, and you're locked in on it no matter where or when it is.
Gladiator.
Gladiator. Why Gladiator?
Yeah. Man, I don't like history class, but I like history. I think it's very interesting. And you throw a test in front of me, I'm probably not going to do very well on it, but I do enjoy learning about history. And for whatever reason, this movie, it's an older movie. It just has always, been something that I enjoyed watching. And then I was actually doing this crazy. I was doing a Bible study when I was in college, and the gentleman that was leading it put on Gladiator, the movie. And I remember thinking, man, what does this movie have to do with faith? Well, the scene that he brought up was, I think it was the first time that Maximus was put in the Colosseum, and with all the other gladiators and slaves, and he asked, how many of you have been in an army before? And one other person said they had been. Long story short, he says, well, if we stick together, we have a better chance of survival. And they lock shields, and that's when the chariots come out, and they end up winning the battle. I think it's called the Battle of Carthage or something like that. They weren't, that the barbarians weren't supposed to win. Well, the thought behind it was, those men locking shields is exactly how we're supposed to be in life. We're supposed to go through life together, locking shields. So that just kind of, when I had that happen in college, I was like, yep, that's definitely my favorite movie for sure.
That's awesome. All right, so favorite TV show.
Favorite TV show. It's no longer on TV, but I'd have to say, well, actually, there's two. Parenthood. It was a sitcom that my wife and I actually went through on Netflix, but
sure.
It was very, we were hooked, and we very wholesome show. And then probably not so wholesome would be the Blacklist.
How about the character you most identify with in the Bible?
Oh man, I don't know if I've ever thought about that. I would like to think someone like Joshua, someone I would say someone like Joshua. Just the a fierce competitor for Christ.
How about,
for God.
That's awesome. How about a Bible verse that you cling to when life just kind of nails you in the face?
Well, it's actually my favorite verse. I sign every autograph with this verse, and it's Mark 10:27, and it says, "For Jesus said, with man this is impossible, but not with God. For all things are possible with God." And it goes along with Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ. How everyone that uses those types of verses, but it speaks a lot more to me. But my birth story is actually pretty amazing. My parents had been married for about 5 years when they decided to start having a family. They got pregnant, made it all the way to term, and they lost the baby within days of giving birth. So my mom had to give a stillbirth.
Wow.
And when they went through this, the doctor said, "Look, you can try to get pregnant as soon as you want, but no, it could be a while with the trauma of having to give a stillbirth." And they almost immediately got pregnant with me. And 13 weeks into the pregnancy, my mom developed a hole in her amniotic sac, and she was put on bed rest for the rest of the pregnancy. And the doctors actually they advised her to her and my dad to think about abortion because I only had a 1 in 4 chance of being born.
Wow.
And if that 1 in 4 chance came true, the doctors guaranteed that I would be physically or mentally disabled. And my parents, aborting was never a thought that went through their mind. They immediately said, looked at each other and said, "No, we're putting our faith in God." And I guess the first thing my mom said when I was born, she looked at the doctor and said, "Not bad for a 1 in 4 chance."
That's awesome.
So, that was my birth story, and that's so God has definitely been protecting me from day one. But that verse speaks to me so heavily because it says, "With man this is impossible." Well, man said it was impossible for me to just be here. And they definitely said it was impossible for me to be here without any physical or mental disabilities. And God said, not so. Everything's possible with God. And here I am, not just alive, but having the platform as a Major League Baseball player to share that story.
I don't really think we need to go any further. That was just an awesome story, and I'm so glad that you shared it because we almost didn't get to it. So thank you so much for sharing that. And it's just been a real treat to hear you and to hear your heart, James. And he is James McCann, Detroit Tigers catcher. You can catch James on Twitter at James McCann 34 or on Instagram at McCannon, that's your nickname, right? McCannon?
That's my nickname.
I like that. McCannon 34, McCannon 34. And just really appreciate your heart, James. Hopefully we'll have you back on next year during the season and check in with you. But thank you for being a part of the podcast. Really appreciate you.
Absolutely. I'd love to be on again.
And we do thank James McCann for joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. As always, you can reach us at sports_spectrum on Twitter. You can follow us on Instagram at Sports Spectrum and on Facebook as well, where all of our content is found. And you can check out sportspectrum.com, where we post these podcasts there. And also, we've recently added every single podcast to our YouTube page. So if you go to YouTube, you'll find every single Sports Spectrum podcast now available to listen to right there on our YouTube page. Just search Sports Spectrum and it'll pop up. So that's really great, and something that a lot of people have asked about, and something we've finally been able to do is get those podcasts over to our YouTube channel. So check that out and subscribe there as well. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time right here on the Sports Spectrum podcast.